Hi guys, Joe Wolverton, Teacher of Liberty, here with you on another video. And it came across the news yesterday as I was reading my news feed about some people having vandalized Plymouth Rock. They quickly removed the graffiti and everything, but it got me thinking about the pilgrims, the people we call pilgrims, who they were, where they came from, why they took such great risks that they took to come across to a wilderness, to a place so harsh that half of them died within the first year. Many of you I know, since we've visited Plymouth together, I know many of you are related to those good people directly, direct grandsons and granddaughters of those good men and women. My own wife, she has 7 direct ancestors on board the Mayflower, and we stood there together and felt the power, and we know that half of those people died, but they were willing to risk it. And I thought, as I was reading this story, I thought, who were they? So, of course, you probably know, and maybe you don't, but they didn't call themselves pilgrims. They called themselves separatists. And as I thought about this, something very important started to occur to my mind, and I wrote it down, and I wanted to make a video about this because I think it's very important and needs to be said, and it is rarely said. So, separatists. They called themselves separatists because they felt like the Church of England, to which they had belonged, that the Church of England was moving away from the requirements of the Christian religion as set forth in the Bible. They felt that the official institution known as the Church of England was no longer representative of the church established by Jesus Christ, the gospel of Jesus Christ as explained in the New Testament. So they felt a need to separate themselves. Well, government, of course, the government of England was not happy with that. So the separatists first had to separate themselves from England and go to Holland, and then finally forced back to England, and then separated themselves permanently, most of them, to America. So separation is just another word, really, for secession. In order for them to live a peaceful life, for them to have a full liberty of conscience, freedom of religion, as we would call it, these separatists, these noblemen and women that we call pilgrims that landed at Plymouth, they had to separate themselves from the greater body of the church, and they had to separate themselves from their native country. They had to secede, and it cost half of them their lives, but they believed it to be worthwhile because they were separating so that they could be at peace, so they could worship the way they believed to be true, and they could be free from tyranny. Now, as I began to think about that, I began to see a pattern that Americans, secession is a tradition for us. We have our pilgrim forefathers who, as separatists, separated themselves from country, right, from the Empire of Britain and came over here. We have the United States of America, the 13 colonies who seceded from England, from Great Britain, right, and became 13 individual nations. Now, unless you, maybe you believe that they weren't 13 individual nations, a plain reading of the Declaration of Independence reveals that they are now, says Jefferson, states equal in stature with the state of Great Britain, these 13 states. Madison makes that very clear in his report of 1800, which I'm going to do a video on later this week. So they were states, nations, as we would call them, these 13 individual countries now who seceded from Great Britain. And we're all happy about that. We're all proud of it. We celebrate it. But, at the Hartford Convention in the early 1800s, as a result of the War of 1812 and the events surrounding that, you had an attempt by some of the states of the Northeast to secede from the Union. You had, of course, in 1861, states seceded, declared their independence from the central government, the way that the 13 states had declared their independence from the central government in 1776. Yet we're taught somehow that that was wrong. New York City tried to secede because of the attempts by the federal government to force men into the army to fight against the Confederacy. On. And then I began to think, wait a minute, it's more than an American tradition. As I looked in the Bible, it started to come to me, Abraham, the Lord commanded him to secede from his country, right? There were all these times, and I started to look it up, and I thought, well, there are a few scriptures. Do you mind if I read them to you real quick? So we have, and like I say, there are a few of them here. I'll take the first one here, is in Ezra, chapter 9, verse 11. Separate yourselves from the people of the land. Then all the congregation answered and said with a loud voice, as thou hast said, so must we do. Separate yourselves from these people that don't share your principles, right? We had, I know I had an earlier one. Yeah, Leviticus 20:26, an earlier example. And ye shall be holy unto me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have severed you from other people that you should be mine. I don't want you to be around those people that don't share your values, right? The one in Ezra, separate yourselves from the people of the land. There's a later one in Jeremiah 50, verse 8. Remove out of the midst of Babylon and go forth out of the land of the Chaldeans. On and on, these examples in the Bible of God commanding his people to secede from whatever civilization, whatever society they were living among, because that society no longer shared the principles that they were told to hold dear. And so people ask me all the time as I go around speaking and as I do the videos and on Instagram, people send me messages. You say, Joey, that we should make America states again. But what if we can't? What if there is no remaining a union with these other states, these separate republics? Look that up, of course. If you're a republic, we are not a grand consolidated country. The Founding Fathers universally rejected that. Read the Federalist Papers. They universally rejected that. Okay? This is no consolidated country. Read Federalist 39 if you want to read a really clear statement from James Madison about that. So, anyway, what if we can't remain united? Well, then we must secede. We must break apart this union. So people often, choke on that and say, well, we shouldn't really do that. But I think that's our tradition, guys. I think as Americans, that's our tradition. That's the tradition in the Bible. When you can no longer remain part of this society that you've been a part of for so long. In the Bible, we see God commanded them, separate yourself, sever yourself, leave this, right? As Americans, our pilgrim forefathers seceded from their country. We had our own 13 colonies secede. We had attempts by the South, the southern states, to secede from the Union, all because they felt like the greater society no longer served the purposes of the Union. And, of course, I have this quote. Maybe it sounds familiar to you, and I'll hurry along here now. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. Now, when Thomas Jefferson writes, when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends. Earlier on, he names what those ends, or another word for that is purpose. What is the purpose of government? To secure the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the purpose of government. If government becomes destructive of your life, your liberty, and your pursuit of happiness, then it is your right, and Jefferson would say it's your duty, to abolish or alter that government. Again, it's our American tradition. There would be no Constitution, guys, that we love, that so many of you love and revere. There wouldn't be one if we as Americans did not believe in the principle of secession. Secession is an American tradition. So finally, I wanted to read you a couple of quotes here. You may notice also a different background. There's a logistics thing going on with some scheduling that changed for me this week. But I will introduce you to my man Kevin here. Quibhin. That's Kevin. The Raven. We have my first cousin, 11 generations removed, Algernon Sidney, the patriot martyr of republicanism with a small r, right? If that which is not just is not law, and that which is not law must not be obeyed. Happy to hear the other day, today, as a matter of fact, I heard this morning from Philip Sidney, who is Algernon Sidney's nephew. It was his father, Philip Sidney's father, who inherited Penshurst, which is the castle. I don't know if you can see it back there. This is Penshurst here. That me and some of my students and I, we Skyped with Philip Sidney, who will one day inherit Penshurst, which was the home of Algernon Sidney. It was his final resting place. Anyway, he said he watched my podcast video on YouTube about Algernon, and he was so happy to find out that I was related to him, so we can make Algernon's name American again. If you remember the sermon that I mentioned, they said that Algernon Sidney's is a name that should be remembered by every American and should be considered as an American as anyone. All right, so secession, and Sidney said that, right? If it becomes destructive, you've got to get out. Otherwise, you're willingly a slave. Who would do that? Who would say, yeah, you know what I want to do? I know freedom is really good and it's what I should have as a child of God, but being a slave is pretty cool. No. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes here real quick, all right? First is from Abraham Lincoln. Yep. Some of you are like, whoa, Joey's quoting Lincoln. Yeah, this is Lincoln when he was a member of the House of Representatives, January 12th, 1848. Quote, any people anywhere being inclined and having the power have the right to rise up and shake off the existing government and form a new one that suits them better. This is a most valuable, a most sacred right, a right which we hope and believe is to liberate the world. Man, how somehow in the next 12 years or so, 13 years, brother forgot all about that. But any people anywhere being inclined and having the power have the right to rise up and shake off the existing government and form a new one that suits them better. This is a most valuable, a most sacred right, a right which we hope and believe is to liberate the world. It would. If we can't make it work in the let's try to make America states again. But remember, secession is an American tradition. All right, last, Emer DeVaudel, a man who, founding father. If you don't have this book and haven't started reading it, get it from Liberty Fund. Emer DeVaudel, Law of Nations. Man, it'll make your day. So Emer DeVaudel on how such a compact is dissolved when violated by one of the parties in the contract. These compacts contain promises. Oh, this is Book 2, Chapter 13, Section 200. Book 2, Chapter 13, Section 200. I'll put it in the show notes, but just in case you want to look it up. These compacts contain promises that are perfect and reciprocal. If one of the allies fails in his engagement, the other may compel him to fulfill them. A perfect promise confers a right to do so. But if the latter has no other expedient than that of arms to force his ally to the performances of his promise, he will sometimes find it more eligible to cancel the promises on his own side also and dissolve the treaty altogether. He has undoubtedly a right to do this, since his promises were made only on condition that the other party should on his part execute everything which he had engaged to perform. Simple as that, guys. Those two quotes, the other things I've read to you, the Bible and our own American history show. Secession is a tradition. When the society that you're a part of no longer sticks to the contract that created your common government and no longer protects life, liberty, and property, but becomes destructive of our life, liberty, and property, it becomes often necessary, right, to dissolve the bands that bound you and to separate and alter and abolish and to institute a new government more suitable to those ends. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. We will have for you another video this week. I'm going to try to do 2 a week plus a Founders Friday, so stay tuned for that. Remember, buy my book, What Degree of Madness, on Amazon. Thank you, those who did. If you buy it, make sure you drop a review on Amazon. It really helps with the algorithm. We got to get the word out there, guys. Please, please do that. Buy one for somebody you know. If you're one of my students and you know all this already, buy one for somebody you know. All right? So on behalf of me, Kevin, and Uncle Algie, until next time, guys. Bye-bye.